Welcome to my non-calculator SOL review video. So we are going to start with square roots. So a perfect square is the product of any number in itself. So that means you're multiplying a number by itself. So perfect squares are the squares of whole numbers. So it says, what is the square root of 324? So 324 is a perfect square. And so we're trying to figure out what number times itself gives us that. So the correct answer, of course, is 18. Now, you can narrow it down. We know that the perfect squares that we've learned this year go from 1 to 400, and the answers are always between 1 and 20. So the only other choice we have between 11 and 20 is 12 times 12, because 2 times 2 is 4, and this ends in a 4. So if you want to double check to make sure, and please write this down, you can double check to make sure your perfect square is correct by doing 18 times 18. So let's quickly review this. So 8 times 8 is 64. Write down your 4, carry the 6. 8 times 1 is 8, plus 6 is 14. Now remember, you need your placeholder because you're multiplying by the tens place now. 1 times 8 is 8, and 1 times 1 is 1. And the last step is to add them up. 4 plus 0 is 4. 4 plus 8 is 12, carry the 1. And 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 3. So we get 324. So we know our correct answer of 18 is perfect. It checks out. Now it says evaluate. Now I'm using the symbol square root of 196. So it's just asking me what number times itself equals 196. So we have, well, 4 times 4. So we could look at 14, because 4 times 4 is 16, and that ends in a 6. And 6 times 6 is 36. So we could also look at 16 times 16 as well. So we think that the answer might be 14. Okay, let's double check to make sure we are correct. So please write this down. So this is how you check to make sure your answer is correct. 4 times 4 is 16, carry the 1. 1 times 4 is 4, plus 1 is 5. Placeholder, because we're in the tens place, so 1 times 4 is 4, and 1 times 1 is 1. So add it up, 6 plus 0, 5 plus 4 is 9, and 1 plus nothing is 1, so it's 196. It does, in fact, check out. So please make sure when you think you have the correct answer, just double check by multiplying the number by itself and see if you get to the correct perfect square. Okay, it says, which is a true statement? So square root of 256, I know it's not going to be 128 because all they did was take half, and actually the square root of 256 is 16, so I know that's not going to be accurate. 5 squared, that means 5 times 5 is 25. Does 25 equal the square root of 25? No, because the square root of 25 is 5. So 25 does not equal 25, so no, that's not correct. 7 times 7 is 49. And what's the square root of 49? 7. So no, 49 does not equal 7. So you got to be careful. And the square root of 100 is 10. Is 5 times 2 10? Yes, so look what we have here. 10 equals 10, so the correct answer is D. So we've got to be real careful when they present the question differently, because we know what square root means, but if we don't look at this question carefully, we might pick B or even C. So be real careful. Okay, let's look at our next topic, absolute value. And absolute value is the distance from 0. And absolute value will always be positive because distance is always positive. Okay, so it's always how far or how many spaces away from 0, so the distance from 0. So what is the absolute value of negative 10? So how far is negative 10 away from 0? It's 10 places. So the absolute value of negative 10 is positive 10. Now in number 5, I'm using the symbol. And the symbol here means absolute value. So what is 15's distance from 0? And of course it's 15, because absolute value is always positive. And finally, evaluate absolute value of negative 1/2. How far is negative 1/2 away from 0? And the answer is 1/2, because distance is always positive. Okay, let's move on to the next page, where we're going to compare and order rational numbers. So when comparing and ordering rational numbers, we change the numbers to the same form. We've talked about this all year. They can be converted to decimals, which is what most people convert them to, or percents. You could do fractions, but when you convert them all to fractions, it becomes a little more difficult. If you change them to a decimal, you can line them up to compare them. So let's look at our first question. Order the following from greatest to least. So we look at these, and only one of them's in decimal form, so we're going to look at the other ones. I see an improper fraction here, so immediately I'm going to turn that improper fraction into a mixed number. So to do that, we ask ourselves, how many times does 8 go into 17? And the answer is 2 times, so I'm going to cross this out and put 2. 2 times 8 is 16, so that means I would have a remainder of 1. And my denominator stays the same. So this becomes 2 1/8. So this is 2 point something. Okay, I'm not going to do anything with it just yet. We're just going to leave it like that, because we may not need to find the decimal for that. Let's look at the other forms. We have 3 4500ths. We have 3 3/7, and we have 34%. Now, we'll come back to this one, but to change a percent to a decimal, we can move it 2 to the left. So this right here would be 0.34. And now we're going to come back to this one here, 3 3/7. So I'm going to come over here, and we're going to review how to do long division. So I've got a fraction here. So top dog goes inside. That's the 3. Bottom dog goes outside. So please write this down. 7 goes into 3 0 times. 0 times 7 is 0. We're going to subtract. 3 minus 0 is 3. And I have nothing else to bring down. So when that happens, I can put in a decimal and bring the decimal straight up. And what I like to do is add 3 zeros. I usually don't have to go any further than that. And since all my other forms only have 2 numbers after the decimal, I'm going to stop there. So we're going to bring down that first 0. 7 goes into 30 4 times. 4 times 7 is 28. We're going to subtract 30 minus 28, and that gives us 2. We're going to bring down a 0. And now 7 goes into 20 2 times. 2 times 7 is 14. I would subtract and get 6. And I'm going to stop there, because I have 2 numbers after the decimal, and none of my other forms have more than 2 numbers so far. So we're going to cross this out for right now and put 3 4200ths. Okay, now it says order the following from greatest to least. So look what we have here. We have one that starts with a 2, one that starts with a 3, one that starts with 3, and one that starts with a 0. So I don't actually need to know the decimal for this one, because I know it's going to come after the ones that start with 3, because I have no other number that begins with a 2. So now we're comparing 3 4500ths to 3 4200ths for the greatest. And obviously, it's going to be 3 and 45 hundredths. And the only other one that starts with 3 is 3 and 42 hundredths, but we're not going to write 3 and 42 hundredths. We're going to write 3 and 3/7. Now, it's between these two, 2 and an eighth, or 0 and 34 hundredths. So, of course, it's going to be 2 and an eighth, but I started with 17 eighths. And then finally, 34%. Okay, so remember, convert them all to the same form. And the only reason I didn't convert this to a decimal is because I knew it was 2 point something. And I knew that was in between the 3's and the 0. So let's move on to number 8, where we have which number is less than 48%. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is convert this to a decimal. So we're going to move it 2 to the left. And I find that this is 0.48. So I'm looking for something less than 48 hundredths. Well, I have 5/10 here. And I know that if I drop a 0 here, this is 50 hundredths. So that's greater. I'm going to cross that out. 3/4. Now, I could do a couple different things here. I could turn this to a friendly fraction if I don't have it memorized. And I can multiply top and bottom by 25. Because that would get the bottom to be 100. And 3 times 25 would be 75 hundredths, which would be 0.75. And a lot of people know that 3/4 equals 75 cents. So a lot of people have that decimal memorized. And of course, that is not less than 48 hundredths. So I'm going to cross it out. The next one here is 0.048. Now, I can drop a 0 here. So is 48 thousandths less than 480 thousandths? And the correct answer is yes, it is. So circle C. And let's just look at this one really quick. Let me show you how to do a friendly fraction here. So we're going to eliminate it, but go ahead and write this down. I'm going to multiply top and bottom by 2 to turn this into 1 and 2/10. And so I know this equals 1 and 2/10. And I could drop a 0 here, 1 and 20 hundredths, and that clearly is more than 48 hundredths. Okay, so let's move on to number 9, which will make the statement true. So when you see something like this where it says 5 hundredths is less than blank is less than 25%, I'm looking for the one in between these two values. So I've got this to be a decimal. I can change this to a decimal, and that gives me 25 hundredths. So I'm looking for which one is less than 25 hundredths, but also greater than 5 hundredths. So it's in between. So the first one we have is 2%. So I can change that to a decimal, 1, 2, and drop in a 0. So we have 0.02. Is that in between there? No, it's not. So cross it out. The next one we have is 1/7. So I don't have this one memorized. So once again, we're going to review long division. So come over here. Top dog goes inside, bottom dog outside. And since all the other ones only have 2 numbers after it, this one has 2 numbers after it. This one is just 2 whole. So I'm going to stop after I get 2 numbers after the decimal. So 7 goes into 1, 0 times. 0 times 7 is 0. Subtract 1 minus 0 is 1. Now remember, put in the decimal, bring it straight up, and drop. Well, I'm only going to drop 2 zeros here because I know I only have to go 2 numbers after the decimal. So drop your first 0. 7 goes into 10. 1 time. 1 times 7 is 7. Now we're going to subtract. 10 minus 7 is 3. Bring down a 0. 7 goes into 30 4 times. And 4 times 7 is 28. So 30 minus 28 is 2. So we're going to go with 0 and 14 hundredths for this one. Is that in between? And the answer is yes. Now let's look at the others just to make sure we didn't make a mistake. This is 60 hundredths. No, that's not in between. And 2 whole is actually 200%, so that's not even close to being in between. So the correct answer is B. Okay, let's look at the last and final example here. Which number has the smallest value? Okay, so the one thing we want to do is convert all these to decimals when we're looking for the smallest value. So 3/20ths. Now I could do long division over here, but I'm going to show you this is actually a friendly fraction. So I notice that I can multiply the bottom by 5 to get to 100. So if I multiply the top by 5, I will have a fraction out of 100, which will give me the decimal. So 3 times 5 is 15. 20 times 5 is 100. So I know that that's 15 hundredths, or 15%. This is a decimal. Now this one is not a decimal, so it's -9/4. It's an improper fraction. So I can see how many times the bottom goes into the top. 4 goes into 9 2 times, with 1 left over, and the denominator is 4s. And don't forget to put the negative back in front, so -2 1/4. And then this one, 2 to the left, is 0.38. Now, I'm looking for the smallest value, and I notice 2 of these are negative. Okay, we have -3 2/10, and we have -2 1/4. And I know that 1/4 is 0.25, so this is actually -2.25. So now the question is, which is smaller, B or C? And remember, the way negatives work is the farther it is away from 0, the smaller it is. So if I'm thinking of a number line, -3.2 is farther away from 0 than -2.25. So the smallest value is -3.2. Because remember, negatives work differently than the way positives work. When positives go up, they get greater. The bigger the negative, the smaller it is. Okay, so -3.2 is the smallest value. So remember, when you're comparing and ordering fraction, decimal, and percent, remember to convert them all to the same form. And if you have a fraction, you can do long division. So that concludes our non-calculator video review. I hope you have a great day.